Dune Spice Wars came into the scene of early access titles by April 26 of 2022, coming right from the Dune Part 1 hype where Timothée Chalamet reinvigorated White Boy Summer. The game is developed by Sharrow Games, creators and designers of Nilfgaard, War Tales, Darksburg, and Evoland. As of last week, they released the latest update to the game, the Air and Sand update. This decided to spice up, enrich the combat strategies in the game and bring another layer to combat. Sadly, this is not something that worked as imagined. Dune Spice Wars is an odd combination of 4X games, the X standing for Explore, Expand, Exploit, and Exterminate, meaning a grand strategy like Civilization or the turn-based sections of the Total War games, this being the map and the resource management of the game, and the real-time strategy games like Command and Conquer, StarCraft, or the real-time scenarios of Total War. The problem is, it doesn't stand for this, instead more like this. This is a huge issue to have in such a well-developed, expertly characterized version of Arrakis. The game was already a doubtful investment from the beginning because as far as I'm concerned, this type of combination hasn't been tried before. I've seen a lot of games that do turn-based management while still having a real-time active combat mode that changes the problems you must solve in the game. However, despite the rich presentation and intuitive mesh of grand strategy with RTS elements, the game has broken one of Sun Tzu's laws. He will win who knows when to fight and when not to fight. Meaning that sometimes there are some concepts, there are some ideas that should not be developed because they're not as good as they sound. So the game sounds rich and eternally replayable in concept, but when you play the game for over 1,000 hours in the earlier iterations and a dozen more in the latest ones, you realize something is quite wrong. Dune Spice Wars is a failed concept. One of the first issues you're going to realize about the game is that it does not have any narrative elements that adapt the story of the Dune series of books. It does take away aesthetic choices seen in the latest film adaptation. Good examples are the armor the Atreides wear in the films, or like the ones their troopers have in game. The same goes for the Harkonnen, with the exception that they have a faction color added to their designs. The developers have already spoken to add a narrative-driven mode that focuses on an original iteration of the characters of Dune. However, this does not supply a relief or fix the issues on the game. In this interview, a developer confirms that they released early access with a working multiplayer first in mind, in hopes of re-engaging with their Nilfgaard audience. I think they succeeded in that and still managed to create a competent AI to work in Conquest, this being a random, large, or small generated map that distributes resources and geography, or Kanji, a 1v1 scenario where two factions fight to win in a small map with the same conditions of conquest. These conditions are divided into domination. This entails a military victory by destroying your opponent's base or assassinating their leader. Hegemony. This entails rule through a geographical expansion and control of resources. Your hegemony rises through a scoreboard and it gives you a victory once you reach the 25,000 score limit. Political. Gain the requirements in executive positions that supply benefits that will eventually open the Dune governorship position, where anyone that holds it for 45 days wins the game. And the economic. Anyone who holds 50% of all Shroom shares available in the market inside the game will win. In concept, these avenues can be used to circumvent advantages in economic or military expansion. But how things play in our minds is very different as to how they play in game. The factions have distinct aesthetics that give their armies an interesting look, but the combat loop only exists inside health, armor, and supplies. This means the only way forward in combat is understanding the unit composition that best fits your army, how they measure against the composition of your enemies, and what development you will choose to enhance your winning potential. This sounds interesting, but the factions share the units in terms of purpose, meaning that outside of abstract percentages, there isn't much to go for. Special units take time to develop and are usually expensive, however fights still end up looking like this. They end up changing the course of battle and engagements, but the combat is still uninteresting and uninspiring. This is without the fact it will probably take a long time to get into their base, making it tedious and uneventful, and you're not going to entertain yourself for much because there isn't much to see anyway. The final way to win in domination is with an assassination. You achieve this through agents and assigning them to an infiltration to the specific faction that you want to execute. You spend resources and you have an assassination mission by which if you are successful, you end up killing their leader. If you haven't noticed the issue already, it doesn't require you to do much thinking. Assassinations and agent effectiveness are reached through the developments. The only other way requires a lot of time and failure from part of your opponent, as every faction in the game game has a competent unit composition. This makes domination the hardest and least interesting of the bunch. Then hegemony comes into play. This is the easiest way to conquer Arrakis and leads to your victory most of the time. You pretty much need to expand successfully and capture resources promptly before they fall into the hands of your enemies. You will also need to expand control of villages and develop ways to gain value outside of expansion. You can gain more with specific buildings and developments in order to reach that 25,000 score quickly. In all fairness, this comes naturally from playing the game, so you don't need to be hyper focused in winning on this manner, because you just need to be aware that everyone is going through the same process and that it's happening passively. So hegemony is not interesting per se, it's just easy. Then we dive into the political one. This is like hegemony, except you need influence, which is something built passively through the land's standing and the buildings like the listening post. You accumulate influence to take votes, expand your control of resources, and eventually build a qualification for certain positions in the council. You win the game after you hold the Dune governorship position for 45 days. And the only way you get to this position is by doing something similar to hegemony. You expand, you control resources, you have special regions, and you slowly but surely qualify for certain positions, and then you can get an opening for the Dune governorship. But as I said, it's just like hegemony, only with some added resources. So politics is just as boring as you would expect and still easy. Then we have the economic one. This simply needs you to reach 50% of the holdings in Trump shares. This is an in-game marketplace that opens a couple of days after you start the game, and that's all you need to have an economic win. Just have 50% of the holdings. It's just long-winded and boring. There's nothing else to do. Now, there are many intricacies in how you get these wins with each faction, but the problem is it will always involve a good amount of waiting, obligatory developments, and about an hour or two of game time with little needing of your immediate attention. This plays a reason as to why I haven't spoken about multiplayer. It's the same process but with a human that is more likely to make mistakes. There is nothing more to say. This leaves Dune Spice Wars with a severe lack of replayability and enthusiasm, as there is no consistent active engagements or problems that would need you to solve by your own experience or tactics. It's something that is really numbing and only requires you to be specific in the development or way you want to build your faction. This means that the only way you can consistently win is by understanding the route you're taking and the way it affects your faction. You stick with it until you win, or you lose for whatever mistake you made during that process, or if some externality affected you. Because there's a very low chance that if you understand what you're doing specifically and to the point, you will lose in this game, because this game is absolutely a numbers game. So I want to make something clear. This game is not bad or mediocre, but it fails to integrate the aspects of real-time strategy well into its vision. This makes combat exceptionally uneventful, yet detached, because outside of upkeep, there is nothing holding this unit to a geographical limitation. That is, unless you speak of aircraft, which is something I didn't make a big part of this whole video, despite it being very close to this update where we have this introduction of aircraft, because aircraft are just airborne ranged units. There's nothing special about them. They can travel throughout the surface without making any vibrations, so you don't have any need to worry for sandworms, but outside of that, they're not doing anything special. Putting everything into perspective, if you don't enjoy the numbers games or how you can manipulate a council, infiltrate a faction for assassination, or expand infrastructure for an unquestionable hegemony, then Dune Spice Wars is not for you. I understand many of their loyal fans will always play their game, but I also understand you will always make an effort to gain more customers, and this project may have succeeded in doing that for Shiro Games, but I believe it has more to do with Dune than with Shiro. Guys, share your thoughts in the comment section, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share the video. Stay tuned for more Spice Wars content down the line, as we will be covering it until its release. Take care guys, and God bless you.